In the courtroom today, a former Smith County court coordinator accused of tampering with government records. Former 7th District Court Coordinator Tony Patterson-White is accused of intentionally concealing or removing approximately 4,500 records from the court's online system with the intent to harm or defraud her former boss, Judge Carrie Russell. Now, back in May, another district judge, Austin Reeve Jackson, declared a mistrial and recused himself. Today, a visiting judge heard the case in a hearing closed to spectators and members of the media. The reason starts with emails sealed by Judge Jackson between Judge Carrie Russell, the special prosecutor, and Judge Russell's court coordinator. In part, today's hearing centered around a sealed motion filed by White's defense attorneys to dismiss the indictment against her, a motion that referred to those sealed emails.
Because they were sealed, but because I referred to them in the motion to dismiss the indictment, we felt we needed to file that as a sealed motion. So the new judge sealed the hearing today because we had filed the sealed motion. However, when the hearing started, the first thing the defense team did was ask for the sealed part of it to be lifted. We asked for the press to come in and watch. We asked for anybody who wanted to come in and watch. However, the judge denied that.
Now, Davidson says the judge did say future hearings would be open as long as they did not include discussions about anything sealed. The judge did not rule on unsealing the emails today. That decision will come at a later date. Davidson says there are approximately 200 emails, while the special prosecutor says there are approximately 41.